What does it take to be a successful professional full-time artist? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I can tell you how I did it. Greetings everyone, welcome to the underground layer where we bring our creations to life. I'm Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. I'm a professional illustrator, designer, and mad creator. And it has been a long journey, me doing this stuff professionally. And there's been ups and downs, like I'm sure with any career. But I often get asked, how do you get to be a professional illustrator? How do you get to work full time and do all this stuff? And for everyone's gonna have their own journey. But I thought I would just kind of go through and just lay out how I got to where I am now and sort of the steps I took, and maybe you can take something away from that. If you're younger or even if you're older and you're just now getting into it, some of this may not apply. I mean, it like I said, it is a journey. So it took a long time for me to get where I am now, and I'm kind of at a position right now where I think this year is shaping up to be probably my best year as an artist, but it hasn't, like I said, who knows what's, hopefully the trajectory just keeps going up, but there's a lot of ups and downs and things like that. And so I just the reason why I want to do this is to kind of show you that journey, show you those ups and downs, and so maybe you can learn from that, maybe you can adapt it to whatever you're doing, and just show you that what kind of it takes to be a professional artist. And a lot of that is just going to be sticking to it and adapting and changing, because my career's had a lot of changes and I've had to adapt, and once one thing kind of ends or changes, you got to figure out what that next step is. So that's the main thing that you want to think of when you're going into this career, is that it's probably not gonna, where you're at in 5 years, 10 years, whatever, is probably not gonna be anywhere near where you started. I'm not just talking about, skill wise and everything, because that's a whole different level. That's a whole different topic. A lot of artists, great artists, way better artists than me, maybe aren't able to do this for a living, or at the level that other people that maybe are not as quote unquote talented or skilled or whatever. But there's a lot more to being a professional artist than just the skill and the art and everything. And I've talked about that before, but just keep that in mind. So without any further delay, I'm just going to kind of go through and tell you how I started off, and hopefully this is helpful to people. I have always been drawing, pretty much my whole life since I was a kid. I was into comics. I'd sit there and draw comics and, on the back of my school papers and everything. So I kind of always had an idea what I wanted to do for a living. And maybe that's part of the reason why I've been able to do this successfully, because there was I didn't have any other aspirations. That's always what I wanted to do. So one way or another, I had to figure out how to make that work. So I went through school. I struggled throughout school. Anything other than art, I struggled in, C's and D's and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes F's. I really did struggle. And so, for me, it's like, okay, so college, that was just like, I just don't know if I have what it takes to do college. But in looking, I started looking at community colleges and things like that, because I could take, I didn't have to take necessarily all the academic classes, because I just wanted to learn. I wasn't so I didn't care too much if I had a degree or whatever. I just wanted to learn the stuff. And so when I got out of high school, I started taking whatever community college art classes I could. And I started off taking a lot of fine art classes, which is good because that's the foundation. But eventually, I had an instructor that was looking at some of the stuff that I was doing. And I was, previous to that, even before I knew the difference between, say, fine art or commercial illustration, or graphic design or anything, I just thought it was all kind of the same thing. I was doing a lot of logos and stuff like that, because I would do comics and I'd design my logos. And I was really interested in advertising and looking at, because that's what I was seeing throughout my life. Like anyone, you're inundated with these commercials and everything, and you see logos and advertising, and it had an effect on me, like, oh, that's kind of an interesting commercial. I see how they're kind of persuading you to get this product based on how cool it looks and all that. So I was always interested in that, and I was doing logos and stuff. And one of my fine art teachers, that was a painting teacher, looked at my stuff and was like, you know what, it seems like you're more interested in graphic design, and you should probably transfer to this other college because it has a little more focus on commercial art. So I did that, and then that college actually had some comics courses and things like that. so I had a pretty good education as far as that went, and from there, I started. There were different assignments, but one of the things I got really into doing was marker renderings. This is before Copics. This was back in the days when they had like the design markers, if you're old enough to remember, or I think Pantone had a set of markers, but marker renderings and things like that. And I had done some really nice marker renderings that were in my portfolio. And there was a company that was asking the school if they knew anyone that could do marker renderings, and it was for an architectural firm in their sort of graphic design department. And so that was sort of my first art job. And previous to that, I had supported myself, while I was going to school. I was working for UPS, I was doing construction and stuff like that. And the stuff like construction throughout, the beginning of my career, I would always kind of go back while I was trying to build myself as an artist and make money. If I needed extra money, I would do construction or whatever. So I have a little bit of skill in that area, not much. I was a journeyman at best at some of those areas. But really, other than that, I've never worked retail or anything like that. So, unless you count like when I eventually started doing, Comic Con shows and things like that, and I kind of had to learn that. But, so I got this job at this architectural firm, and it was really kind of a cool place because most of the work that we were doing there was for a lot of it was for like malls and food courts and things. And in those malls were some really cool stores. Like one of the counts that we had was at the time there was a Warner Brothers studio store, and they had these elaborate, displays with the Looney Tunes characters and stuff like that. So I got to work with all the Looney Tunes characters, and this was back when Animaniacs was first kind of premiering, and so I got to see that before it actually took place, and what was, the behind the scenes when they were just building the idea for the show, and we got to do a lot of that cool stuff for Warner Brothers, DC, all that kind of stuff, because that's all under the same umbrella. So we got to do a lot of cool stuff like that, and there were a lot of other cool stores, and basically this was before computer aided drafting, CAD, and all that stuff, where nowadays everything's, if you're doing a concept for a whatever is a shopping mall or whatever, it's all 3D rendered and everything. Back then, we were doing all that stuff with markers and everything. So I was doing that for a while, and then eventually I got laid off from that job, and that was the beginning of my career. And then I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? I got laid off. But little did I know, and this is something you want to be prepared for as an artist, is that artist jobs in particular, most of them don't last very long. So that's just something you have to learn. And I kind of had to learn the hard way, to the point where further down the road it was just like, okay, every day I go into work, I'm like, is this the day I'm going to be laid off? And just, I guess, being prepared for that and having some sort of a backup plan. But anyway, that was the first, instance of me getting laid off. So then I'm like, okay, what do? I go back to doing some construction, and then maybe a little freelancing thing here and there. I hadn't really started my own company yet or anything. But, and then I was looking for opportunities, and I think it was just through an ad in the paper, ironically enough, somebody was looking for somebody to do comic strips. So I met with this guy. It was a really interesting story. This was a guy who had a pet gibbon ape. And if you're not familiar with what a gibbon is, it's almost like the size of like a monkey, but it's an ape. It doesn't have a tail or anything, but this was his pet, and they're kind of, it was black and it kind of had a ring around his face. But he would take this little guy pretty much everywhere he would go, and he was sort of this local celebrity, and he would go to like sports events, and everyone would just love this little guy. So he wanted to kind of create him as a role model for kids. So we started doing these comic strips, and in the beginning we didn't really know, we weren't sure exactly what we were going to do, but I just knew that comic strips weren't the correct vehicle for this. What he wanted to do to make a role model out of this little guy. So eventually I persuaded him. I'm like, kids don't really read comic strips. They read comic books, but this is at the time you wanted like a syndicated, like you would see in the newspaper. And most, I as a kid, kids do read strips and stuff, but not mostly it's mostly adults who are reading the newspaper and stuff, and it just wasn't the right avenue. So I'm like, we should really develop this into a children's show. And so that's kind of what we did. And there was a lot of trial and error because we weren't children's show producers, but we learned a lot. We had a couple failed starts trying to produce a pilot. And then eventually we learned a lot from those failed things, and we had hired other people and to do like props and things like that, and just weren't happy with it. I'm kind of like, I can do this better myself. And so I learned how to build props and everything, and we came, and the third attempt at a pilot was just, I mean, it came out great. We did, and that's where, you know, I learned to do stuff like build underground layers and all that kind of stuff, building sets and things like that. So, you know, I wrote a teleplay for this pilot. We shot it and it came out really good. At that point we were able to figure out how to do it. We got with the right, you know, production companies and things like that, and we shot a really cool pilot. We shopped it around and we actually got it optioned by like a big Hollywood studio. And you know, if you've ever had any kind of deal like that, it's really tough to get it all the way. I mean, just the fact that we got it to that point where they hired a professional writer, and we were getting ready to shoot an additional pilot and everything. And then, like a lot of projects like that, it just falls apart. There's changes in management, things like that, and it just didn't line up. So that kind of went away. And then for a little while after that, we kind of figured, we struggled and we looked to see if we could find another place for it. And then eventually, unfortunately, my partner in that endeavor ended up passing away. He was an older gentleman, and he ended up getting sick and passed away. So that was kind of the end of that. In the end of my children's, I guess, television career, somewhat. But what happened after that was, because I had been working with these production companies, I ended up starting work for one of those production companies full time, doing basically whatever they needed. They needed certain like video graphics or just a lot of graphic design and things for their webs, doing the website stuff for them and all that kind of stuff. So doing all that. So I did that for a while, just part time. And in the meantime, you know, I had a lot of art jobs where I was doing art, which was cool. I was getting paid to do art, but it was only part-time. So aside from that, I was, you know, working and building my company and everything. Or I don't know if I had actually started Serkworks at that point. Actually, yeah, I think at this point, when I was working at that film and television production company, I had started Serkworks, doing stuff on the side. And at the time also, I was married. My ex-wife was an RN, so we had some income coming there. So because it's and that's another thing that will help you if you're getting started. If you do have a significant other that has a steady income, because, you know, throughout, you know, when we were together, throughout that period, there were times where, you know, I had a lot of work and I was doing really well, and I was kind of I wasn't the sole breadwinner, but there were times where I was doing really well and pulling in a lot more money, even at some points more or equal to what an RN would make. And then there was other times it's a lot of feast or famine. You get really busy at one point, and so it was a lot of ups and downs, and it was just that, you know, okay, now's the time where you kind of got to pull, you know, kind of help us through this, and now I got some money coming in and that type of thing. So if you're in a position like that can help you while you're sort of building your, you know, your art career. Now, a lot of, you know, this journey, it's an evolution, and that's one thing that I want to get into your head, that you have to be willing to adapt and change and pivot and stuff like that. So when I first started Serkworks, it wasn't what it is now. It wasn't the mad scientist lab. There was you know, inklings of certain things, like the little, you know, mascot character that I have and things like that, but it wasn't what it is now. But basically the idea behind it was a character. I was like a character design factory. You know, I would offer to, here, I'll design a character for you, and then we'll take it to the next level. We'll integrate that character into advertising, into your website, into all that stuff. But it would be based on, oh, you need a mascot or a character for your company, and that was kind of the starting point for what I was doing. So back then the tagline was illustration and design with character, and then it seemed like further down the road everyone wanted to be a character designer, and it wasn't really that much of a novelty or anything different than other people really weren't offering. But the other thing I was doing was I was submitting artwork and stuff, because in order to build a client base, I would just send submissions. There was a book called I think Illustrators Market and Writers Market, and you know, you go through and there's addresses and you mail stuff out, you do cold calls, all that stuff you don't like to do. And you know, being a professional, it's a lot of stuff that you don't like to do. All the business stuff that we as artists kind of dread, you kind of learn how to do it. And hopefully, like me, you'll start to appreciate it, and you'll get better at it, and you'll actually start to enjoy some of the business side of art. So one of the things I was sending out, you know, I was sending out samples to different places like greeting card companies. So I started getting some work doing designs for greeting cards, which kind of led me to start at part-time for another company doing these custom greeting cards. This is for mostly really affluent people who threw these elaborate parties and needed custom invitations and things like that. So I was doing all these short run, really cool designed, we'd have fold outs and all kinds of crazy stuff. It was kind of cool because it was kind of very maker style and everything, but kind of mass produced to, can include maybe like 200 however 50 to 200 guests or something at an event or something, and do these really cool invitations. So I did that. Meanwhile, kind of supplement my income while I was building Serkworks or in those famine areas and everything. So continued to do that. Got laid off from that job, and I can't remember the scenario what that was. I think the additional art director or artist who had left decided they wanted to come back, so I kind of was pushed out. But what happened was there was a relative of that company that I was working for who had a software company, and just like they said, why don't you talk to my brother? I mean, I think he has some work that he can give you. So I started doing some work in software, and a lot of it was graphic design it was like business software. It wasn't super fun, but one of the things I did a lot of there was like, as far as the website, and I had done some of this previous, was a lot of caricature. So every year I would do a caricature of all the employees and stuff as a holiday card and everything like that. And I was doing that kind of stuff for a while. So yeah, there was that was a short area in my career, and eventually I was making enough with Serkworks to make that full time. So I I was just doing Serkworks full time for a while, and I think it was right about that time that the recession hit, and then stuff started to dry up, and then it was it was difficult for a while. If anyone remembers back in the day, where the housing crash and all that kind of stuff, and so from there I kind of came out of it. I was just basically back to looking for work because most of the freelance stuff had dried up and everything, the stuff that I was doing with Serkworks and the whole character design stuff. And I answered an ad for a local game studio doing, video games. It was, previous to that, I forgot to mention that when I was doing freelance, I had done, a company reached out to me and was asking if I could do some emoticons, which nowadays are called emojis, but back then they were called emoticons, and it was for this company called Facebook. And I'm like, and back then most people didn't know what Facebook was. I didn't. I may have heard of it, but I was just kind of, well, what's Facebook and how does it work? So in the beginning, this company, they were developing all these, I guess, mini apps and things that work with Facebook, and one of them were just these sets of emoticons with different, whether it was smiley faces or different. We did some that were like little monkeys and like Santa Claus and pumpkins and all that kind of stuff with different, expressions. So I'd done some of that. So I'd done a little bit of that stuff like for Facebook, and then I ended up getting hired at this video game company that primarily made Facebook games. This is back in the day, was when everyone was playing these Facebook games that were integrated with, you get these awards and you'd win points, and everyone was sharing them and probably annoying everyone else because you're getting this thing, somebody got this, join and play along with you on Facebook. But there was a really cool company, and I think I was there for about 3 years before I got laid off again. Or a company kind of ended up shutting down. Eventually they shut down altogether, but we had some really cool games that we were working on. If you follow me long enough, you'll know that I was working on a game called Miscrits, which is kind of like a Pokemon style fighting game. There's some really old videos of me doing stuff like that. But while I was there, one of the things that I started doing was we would stream some of the creations. We'd talk about some of the characters we were developing, and we'd show how we created them and everything while streaming. So that kind of got me into, back then we were doing that on a platform called, I think it was called Ustream. And then I, discovered, after, I think that went away or something, but, so I discovered YouTube. So right around that time is when I started doing YouTube, and I discovered the whole comics community and everything on YouTube. And that was my introduction to kind of this. And I started doing that, and I've been doing this pretty much at least, almost every single week, putting up videos and everything. And doing that. So that was my introduction to that, and just through working for a game studio. So while I was working at the game studio, I wasn't doing, because it was fun work, and I loved doing it and everything. And I had been working on my comic book on the side, but I wasn't really doing any a lot of freelance stuff. So when that kind of position ended, then it was like, okay, what do? I don't really have enough freelance stuff. I got to try to build this back up. So basically, here we go. I get to figure out what I'm going to do next. So I ended up I ended up working at this. It was a syndicated radio program, and it was, the clients were, older, and I just remember it was just a nightmare because everything had to be, like, 16-point type on a computer so older people could read it, and it was just, the work was not enjoyable, and this place was it was the worst art job I ever had. It was like almost like a prison. You go in, there's a gate that opens, and you had to be asked to be excused to use the restroom and clock in. I mean, and I know a lot of people, a lot of people do, you've got to clock into your job and stuff like that, but as an artist, coming from a place like this game studio where, there's air hockey tables and ping pong tables and video games and basketball, and you get to work hard, you get to play hard, and people understand that, to be creative, you need some of that outlet and everything, and they got a lot of great work, but it wasn't all work. There was play, and there's some fun, and make your employees happy, make your employees want to work there, and that's kind of what the game company was. The next company, it was the exact opposite, and it was just horrible, and I hated every minute of it. And then one of the some of the guys who had after that one company closed, they were getting together to start, along with some other people, start this new startup video game company, or social gaming, whatever you call it. And so I started there, and that was kind of cool because they're just building, and they had these grandiose ideas of this, they were looking at these different properties. One of them had like a pool and a basketball court and all this kind of stuff. And that company eventually, some of the funding that they had just kind of fell through, and then that fell apart. But again, just kind of this repeating thing where, a lot of these jobs don't last, and you've got to be able to figure out, okay, what's kind of my next move? And of course, along on your journey, you're going to be building up your skills, and you're going to be, at this point, I've got all this, any job. I've done so much of all these little things that if somebody needed somebody to do like a map or something, I could show, I've done maps. If somebody needed web design, I've done web design. I've done all this stuff. So it really, it opened those opportunities to all these different areas that I could go into if I wanted to. So, at this point, I think this is right around the time where I decided, so this next kind of social gaming company kind of closed down. And then I just kind of went, I still had been doing some stuff on the side, kind of building up building Serkworks back up, but I wanted to change what I was doing. I was doing conventions and things like that, and I'm like, and I think it was right around that time I was doing videos, I was doing the 100 Days of Making Comics, all that kind of stuff. And that's when I sort of, what are all the things that I like to do? I like robots, aliens, I like zombies. How can I take all those things, put them together, and in some kind of, and brand it together? And that's when it kind of became not just Serkworks, but Serkworks Art Labs, where it was kind of what you're seeing now, at least not right now. And that could just a little spoiler, that could change in the future. But so I started doing a little more of that, and I, diving more into comics and all that kind of stuff. And then I think, and then again, I forgot how I think it was just me, I was like, okay, it's taking longer than I thought to build up this company the way I wanted. I need some extra income. So I started looking for opportunities, and I ended up getting a position at a MLM, which is kind of multi-level marketing, if you're familiar with that, where people go and, like, whether it's Tupperware or whatever, and they go to have parties and stuff and sell the stuff and whatever you feel about that. I didn't do any of the marketing stuff. I was basically, the illustrator designer, and this company, what they were selling were like rubber stamps and crafting things. And contrary to what you would think, it was actually a really cool job because I got to design so many different things. And when I was originally hired there, I was hired to be a graphic designer to kind of work on their catalog. And then I'm like, I'm looking at kind of the stamps they do, and I think they recognize the stuff they were doing that I could do way better. And eventually, I think I may have worked on the catalog for maybe a week before they're like, you know what, we want to have you do all our, do our illustrations. So I was illustrating all these different stamps, and we were doing some really cool stuff. And it was cool because it was all illustration, and there's not a whole, I mean, I guess there's animation studios and stuff like that, but there's not a whole lot of companies where you just go in and all you do is illustration and different things all the time. And I got to steer kind of some of a lot of the look of what those things were. And so I worked there for 3 years, and I think 3 years is the top for any company that I've worked for. I never worked for a company longer than 3 years before they either folded or got laid off. And that's kind of what happened here. Was they had ousted kind of the president of the company, and then after that things kind of just went downhill. And then so that was the end of that. That ended, and then I ended up going back to freelance, but one of my clients was that president that was ousted, and he was starting his own kind of stamp company. I did a lot of stuff for him. Meanwhile, getting into doing YouTube and all that stuff. And right around that time is kind of when I decided, I really, if I have my druthers, I don't want to work for another company. I want to do things on my own terms. So it was like, who do I have to be to get to do that? And then, I started looking at ways to, build passive income streams. Some of that is through, there's not a lot as far as YouTube, at least not right now, as far as bringing in money, whether it's sponsorship. There's some I get some affiliate money, from links and things like that, but it's not a lot, at least not in my, my experience yet. But then I started, I was doing comics and stuff, and then I started learning how to do digital products, and I started to build if anyone is watching this, if you don't already have the Comic Maker Starter Kit, which is free, you can get that. But then there's other even more advanced, digital products that'll help you make comics and other things that help you build avatars and I was doing all kinds of stuff like that. So I started to build up a library of that, and then I started getting into publishing, like through Amazon's KDP, publishing on there. And instead of just having one job that if it's taken away, then you're like, oh, what do I do now? You've got all these different incomes and everything, and just taking everything that I've learned along the way and figuring out, what can I do with this? What kind of products can I put this on? And I talked a lot about this on the previous video, and that's what I started doing, and that's what I've been doing now. But that's what I want to do, is continue to build these different streams of income, whether it's through comics, whether it's through digital products, whether it's through other publishing, all these different areas. And so, what's next? I mean, there are, we're kind of seeing a little bit of the beginning of AI and everything. And I've talked the last few weeks, and I've talked a lot about that kind of stuff. And I don't know exactly where that's going to go. I think we can use that as a tool, but I think it's going to have, and part of being a successful artist is figuring out, like I said, how to pivot, how to change, because things are going to change, and you have to adapt with that, and learn what's the future going to hold. I mean, platforms come and go, different things change, all that stuff. So you have to be ready for that. And kind of what I'm seeing with the AI is that I think we're going to have to go into more of an area of hands-on, showing people physically like things we're creating, sort of behind the scenes and stuff like that. The process, because if people can see that, they're going to be more interested, because otherwise, if all they're seeing is a finished product, who knows, was that done by human hands? Is it done by AI or whatever? So, my next step going into like next year and everything like that is really, I'm going to be really doubling down on YouTube. I've been doing YouTube for a long time, and it's, I haven't blown up or anything like that, but I think it's because I haven't really been doing the right kind of content. So moving forward, I want to do some more hands-on stuff, and I'll be talking more about that when I get closer to that. But I really, I've been learning a lot about what makes, successful YouTube channels and things like that. And I know I can kind of do it in a way that is going to be interesting to my existing audience, and hopefully bring in some a new audience as well, and just kind of grow this thing. So that's kind of my goal for the future. But a lot of that has to do with kind of what I'm seeing with AI, and a lot of what I'm going to be doing. And I've done stuff on the past where I've shown how to do stickers and things, and wax packs and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking at doing more of that kind of stuff, take it to to the next level, and that's kind of what the future looks like for me. That's kind of what I'm planning. But I just wanted to kind of take you along on this journey. Hopefully it was interesting enough to you, and hopefully you get something out of it. But just know that there's going to be, it's called a journey for a reason. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns and detours and things like that, and you have to be ready for that, because it's not like back in the day, like my dad, he worked for a company for 30 years, whatever. He got a, gold watch, retired and all that stuff. That wasn't usually not really ever the case with art. And it's it's becoming really not the case with any business. I mean, people are getting laid off all the time. If a company can find a way to save money, if it requires them laying off people, they're not gonna think twice about it. So I think more and more people are going to start to realize kind of what artists have learned all the time, that you've got to, what they taught in school for me, where it's like, okay, you work, you get a job, you work for somebody, you work for them for whatever, 30 years, like I said, and then you retire and all that stuff. Hopefully they're not teaching that same thing, because that's not the world of the future. The world is going to be a lot of gig economy. It's going to be a lot of, building different streams of income, all this stuff that as an artist I've already learned that I think the rest of the world is going to have to start figuring out. But that's the one benefit I can say about being an artist. I think I'm a little ahead of the game because I've lived through all this and I've been able to adapt and change. So if I had to give any advice on what you need to be as an artist, aside from the skills, aside from all that, it's just tenacity, stick-to-itiveness, adaptability. You have to learn, you have to constantly be educating yourself. And for me, and I don't know if I would give this advice to people, but for me, like I said, there really wasn't ever a plan B. So I got to figure out one way or another to happen. Maybe that's not super responsible to tell people, because you got to, I don't want somebody to just struggle and struggle. You should be seeing growth. If you're not seeing any growth, then you may have to reconsider. But if you're seeing steady growth, then you get to figure out, okay, what's making this grow? What can I do to double down on that? And what's the future look like? Where do I need to head to be ahead of the game? And how can I use my artwork how does my artwork integrate into whatever that next step is, as far as, what clients, the world is looking for as far as how it pertains to art and everything. So anyway, that's my journey. Hopefully that you got something out of it. But this will be good for anyone because you always get asked that, well, how did you start off? And I can always point people to this video. So anyway, let me know, if you could briefly let me know about your journey, if it was similar, if it's different, or anything like that. Let me know in the comment section. Other than that, I will see you guys later. That is all. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.